June 1941, the Soviet Union. The German army swiftly advances deep into Soviet territory after a successful surprise attack against its former partner in the war against Poland. Behind the regular units come the Einsatzgruppen, the Nazi mobile death squads who carry out mass shootings of Jews, communists, and other persons deemed dangerous to establishing long-term German rule on Soviet territory. Shortly after the 19th of September 1941, when German forces enter the city of Kyiv, the capital of Soviet Ukraine, major explosions shake the city, destroying the German headquarters and killing a large number of German soldiers and officials. Though the explosions were prepared by retreating Soviet soldiers and officials, the Germans used the sabotage as a pretext to murder the Jews who still remain in the city. Between the 29th and 30th of September 1941, just outside Kyiv, the SS, together with German police units and their auxiliaries, massacre 33,771 Jews at a ravine called Babi Yar, or Babyn Yar. However, the killings do not end in September 1941, and by the end of the Second World War, between 100 and 150,000 people will be murdered there. However, these atrocities will not remain unpunished, and the main perpetrators will pay for their crimes with their lives. Kyiv had fallen to the German army after a brutal siege on the 19th of September 1941. When the Wehrmacht, the German army, entered the city, the soldiers found streets deserted and buildings damaged. At that moment, approximately 60,000 Jews remained in the city, mostly women, children, the elderly, those who were ill, or those who had been unable or unwilling to flee earlier. The capital of Ukraine was now part of the Reichskommissariat Ukraine, ruled by Nazi politician Erich Koch, with absolute authority. In the days following the German occupation, explosions tore through the city center. Soviet explosives left behind by retreating troops detonated, destroying the German headquarters and killing hundreds of soldiers. The occupation forces blamed the Jewish inhabitants of the city for these attacks of sabotage. In response to this attack, officers of the German army, the SS, and the police met at the commandant's office in Kyiv. Among those present were the military governor, Generalmajor Kurt Eberhard, and SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jeckeln, who was appointed just a few months earlier by Heinrich Himmler to be the higher SS and police leader of southern Russia and Ukraine. Jeckeln's subordinates also participated in the meetings, especially SS Brigadeführer Otto Rasch, head of Einsatzgruppe C, one of the Nazi mobile killing formation, and SS Standartenführer Paul Blobel, commander of Sonderkommando 4A, smaller killing unit which was part of the Einsatzgruppe C. During the meeting, they agreed to kill the Jewish population of Kyiv, and the massacre was to be disguised as an evacuation. Wehrmacht units would secure the streets and block off escape routes from the execution site, while the mass murder was to be carried out by units under the command of Rasch and Blobel, who were ultimately responsible for many atrocities in Soviet Ukraine during the summer and autumn of 1941. On the 28th of September 1941, announcements about an evacuation were issued to the Jews of Kyiv, also known historically as Kyiv. They were to gather near the train station the following day and bring warm clothing, money, personal documents, and valuables. More Jews than expected responded to this call, and the following morning, thousands of Jews began to assemble. One of the reasons why so many people came was that German decrees were accompanied by warnings that Jews who failed to appear would be shot. The German surprise was reported also 2 days later by the commander of the Einsatzkommando, where he wrote to his superiors, The difficulties resulting from such a large-scale action, in particular concerning the seizure, were overcome in Kyiv by requesting the Jewish population through wall posters to move. Although only a participation of approximately 5,000 to 6,000 Jews had been expected at first, more than 30,000 Jews arrived, who, until the very moment of their execution, still believed in their resettlement, thanks to an extremely clever organization. People came on foot or with their carts, believing the promise of relocation. German soldiers and Ukrainian auxiliaries herded them toward the edge of the city. As the columns reached the ravine, the deception became clear. Guards shouted, dogs barked, and people were forced to undress. Clothes, valuables, and documents were taken away and sorted into piles. The victims were then driven forward, down into the ravine, where an eyewitness remembered, once undressed, they were led into the ravine, which was about 150 meters long and 30 meters wide and a good 15 meters deep. When they reached the bottom of the ravine, they were seized by members of the Schutzpolizei and made to lie down on top of Jews who had already been shot. The corpses were literally in layers. A police marksman came along and shot each Jew in the neck with a submachine gun. I saw these marksmen stand on layers of corpses and shoot one after the other. The marksman would walk across the bodies of the executed Jews to the next Jew, who had meanwhile lain down, and shoot him. Of the thousands of victims, only a few survived to tell what happened. To this day, at least 29 survivors are known. One of them was Dina Pronicheva, an actress from Kyiv's puppet theater who escaped by pretending to be dead among the bodies. Later, she described the horror, saying, "Victims took off their clothes while the Germans mercilessly beat and unleashed dogs upon them. Some people begged for mercy, others silently undressed and walked down to the ditch. Some went insane. The Germans ran them in a single file through an opening in the earthen wall, from where I heard the rattle of a machine gun." For the perpetrators, the killings were methodical. Blobel and his men rotated the firing squads, brought new ammunition, and recorded the results. The Einsatzgruppe reports to Berlin read like military summaries. On the 29th and 30th of September, 33,771 Jews executed. The Wehrmacht engineers then destroyed parts of the ravine walls with explosives to bury the bodies with dirt, and many of the wounded were still alive when they were covered with earth. Soldiers and police loaded trucks with the possessions of the dead, including money, shoes, clothes, and sent them to warehouses to be sorted and distributed, among others also to the German army fighting in Eastern Europe. When the guns fell silent on the evening of the 30th of September, 33,771 people were dead. It was one of the largest single mass shootings of the Second World War. However, the killing at Babi Yar did not end in 1941. In the following months and years, the ravine became a site of ongoing executions. Roma families, Soviet prisoners of war, Ukrainian partisans were all brought there and shot. Some were thrown alive into the pits. In total, the estimate is that between 100 and 150,000 people were murdered at Babi Yar during the Nazi occupation. As the Germans were losing the Second World War, and the front collapsed in the summer of 1943, the SS began to erase the evidence. Paul Blobel returned to Kyiv to lead Sonderaktion 1005, a secret operation to exhume and burn the bodies from mass graves across Eastern Europe. At Babi Yar, around 300 prisoners from the nearby Sirets concentration camp were forced to dig up decomposing corpses, pile them, and burn them. The prisoners worked under guard, breathing in the smoke of the dead bodies, and when the job was done, they were lined up to be shot themselves. However, a handful of inmates escaped and testified about the Germans' crimes to the Soviet authorities. Justice finally caught up with some of the perpetrators of the Babi Yar massacre when between the 17th to 28th of January 1946, a trial in Kyiv convicted 15 German police officials for their roles of the killing of the civilian population. On the 24th of January, the aforementioned survivor, Dina Pronicheva, took the witness stand and described before the Soviet court what she saw at Babi Yar. She recalled, "With my own eyes I saw this horror. Although I was not standing close to the pit, terrible cries of panic-stricken people and quiet children's voices calling, 'Mother, Mother,' reached me." Of the 15 defendants, 12 were sentenced to death. On the 29th of January 1946, 200,000 people gathered in what is today Independence Square in Kyiv to witness the execution of the men who were personally responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 innocent men, women, and children. Soviet officials brought the 12 men to the gallows on 6 trucks and tied the nooses on as thousands of people watched. On the platform of each of the 6 trucks stood 2 convicts. Shortly before the execution, an official gave the speech, which he ended with the words, "Comrade Commandant, carry out the sentence." The trucks then moved forward, leaving the condemned Nazis to hang swaying in the air. The crowd cheered, and the disabled people who had suffered under the Nazis used crutches to beat the corpses of the hanged. But this was just the beginning. Paul Blobel stood before the so-called Einsatzgruppen trial, one of the subsequent Nuremberg trials, and despite him claiming that he had only obeyed orders, the judges rejected his defense and sentenced him to death for his role in killing over 60,000 people in Eastern Europe. Paul Blobel was hanged on the 7th of June 1951 at Landsberg prison in Germany. Friedrich Jeckeln, along with 7 other high-ranking German officers, was tried before a Soviet military tribunal in the Riga trial from the 26th of January to the 3rd of February 1946 and was sentenced to death. He was hanged in Riga on the 3rd of February 1946 in a public execution attended by 4,000 people. Kurt Eberhard was arrested by American forces in November 1945. And while in custody, he committed suicide on the 8th of September 1947 in Stuttgart in Germany. Unlike the perpetrators of many other massacres, those primarily responsible for the killings at Babi Yar in September 1941 were punished. The massacre at Babi Yar stands as a warning to history. It shows how quickly an ordinary city can become a killing ground, how armies and bureaucrats can turn ideology into slaughter, and how obedience can erase humanity. The ravine is not only a place of Jewish tragedy, it is a mirror of Europe's descent into organized murder during the Second World War. Today, tens of thousands of victims are commemorated by several memorials. Not even Russia's 2022 assault on Ukraine, when missiles hit the area of the memorial site, stopped people from remembering. Commemoration continued, defying both past and present violence.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.